Hi, Jess. Back in the Something Who bunker.
Yes, and so soon. But what have you done with Paul?
Oh, you just missed him. I'm sure he'll be back soon.
He wasn't here last time, so either he's avoiding me,
Oh, I'm sure he's not that.
or that internet conspiracy theory must be true.
Oh? Which one?
You know, Paul is dead.
Never heard of it.
I mean, he was very much alive last time I saw him.
We recorded with him quite recently.
Well, I did my own research, and according to the theory... sorry, let me pull it up on my phone. Second Coming of Christ. Omni-rumored true, buried under Ian Levine's base. Okay, here we go. Paul died in an unfortunate incident with a Chumbly soon after recording a podcast. But to spare the public from grief, the surviving Something Who team replaced him with a sound-alike, subsequently misspelled there, subsequently communicating this secretly through the titles of their podcasts.
That's ludicrous.
Totally ridiculous.
I mean, which titles?
Well, may you ask. Episode 89, After Image. Episode 90, Hidden in Plain Sight. The internet thinks it was Paul on these two, but the event happened before they came out.
But they're just titles playing on the episodes we reviewed.
Richard. Episode 91, Necessary Evil. Telling me that, unfortunately, Paul wasn't available for the recording.
Well, he wasn't.
Sure. Episode 93, Royally Duped, hinting to the world that you had a sound-alike. Episode 94, A Shoulder to Cry On, trying to hide your grief.
It wasn't like that at all.
Episode 95, Sensitive Kind, remembering Paul for his sensitivity.
This is crazy. And where would we find a sound-alike?
Come on, everyone knows, even me, that Paul sounds exactly like David Mitchell.
Oh, come on. David Mitchell's a star. He wouldn't come on this.
But Giles was on Only Connect. He probably asked Victoria. Ha!
Don't be daft.
Look, it's a clever theory. I'll give you that. But the problem is, there's no truth in it. Paul's just away for this one. He'll definitely be back next time because he was keen to chat about the Celestial Toy Maker.
Are you sure?
Would we lie to you?
So, you're sure, really?
Yes.
Very well. I'll accept your word as English gentleman. But I know that wasn't really Tim on your last podcast.
Welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed, that sketch, to make Something Who. Hello, I'm Richard and we're back with Something Who podcast, episode 97, where this time we're looking at two stories with a tangential connection to the Beatles. Initially we'll look at First Doctor story The Chase from the original season 1, and later we'll examine 15th Doctor adventure The Devil's Chord from the new season 1. And with me to decide whether these stories beetle along or just seem a bit grubby is another great panel, starting with science and astronomy writer Giles. Hello, Giles.
Hello.
Lovely to see you again.
Yes, likewise.
Not very long since we were watching one of the episodes that we're looking at tonight in London with our other Something Who participant, Gav Rymel.
Indeed, yes, yeah. I can't believe I watched episode 6 of The Chase twice in 2 weeks. Cause I thought should I wing it, having watched it once, and then I thought no, I got to sort of watch it on the end of in its proper context.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was a terrifically fun event, I must say.
Yes, yeah, let's hope that we do something similar soon. And fast becoming a regular, it's Lego modeler Rick. So hello, Rick, and welcome back to Something Who.
Richard, it is great to be here talking about something new Who tonight, which will be interesting. I'm very excited by the new series, and at time of recording, I think we've all seen the first 4 episodes, and I'm totally thrilled by it. So it'd be great to have a chance to discuss something from the 1960s, but also something that's absolutely current in terms of our Who watching.
Yeah, fantastic. We started out, I guess, when we did this podcast, looking at some of the 13th Doctor's stories first time round, and it's nice, yeah, to get to the fresh as well as the well known. And back for a return trip to Something Who, it's Doctor Who fandom's own musical maestro and Dudley Simpson aficionado, Jess Jurkovic.
Hey!
Well, hey, hello everybody. Glad to be back. Thank you for asking me, and so soon. I hope that doesn't break any rules or anything.
Yeah, you were so well suited to some of the topic for tonight. So yeah, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you. So it's great to have you along.
Thank you.
You heard me singing on the bonus track to the last episode, and it's opened up a crack in time through which you emerged.
Oh, well, I'm thrilled to be able to talk about such musically interesting episodes, particularly one which I'm just sort of floored at the audacity of, as an episode such as The Devil's Chord, as well as a classic story that I've enjoyed for many, many years, The Chase, despite myself, for sure.
Sure. And, do you want to say a few words about your Dudley Simpson project and how that's coming along?
Oh, sure. Well, let's see. As if there's more than one person. I've completed 2 seasons now, over 50 transcriptions of music performed and analyzed on my YouTube channel. I've just recently put out a little trailer, sort of pitch for a new season, what I'm calling season 2.5, in which I'm going to do some non-performance videos. I'm going to do some music-related research videos, documentaries, if you will, about various aspects of particularly the show in the classic era's music and how it was used, some different ideas that I've been tossing around in my mind for some time, and so I'm hopefully going to get a chance to manifest them in these videos, and so I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, I've been enjoying your YouTube shorts that you've been doing recently and popping up on Instagram as well. It's really been a good refresh of some of the material you've already got out there, including The Chase.
Thank you. It's my first attempt at trying a YouTube short. I'm always at least several years behind in terms of technology, and when I finally get around to it, I try to dive in. And so thanks for watching those. I'm going to try and make some more of those, but I also had a shocking coup when I put together just recently Shutigatwa singing the Skyboat song in Boom together with Patrick Troughton playing it on the recorder in The Web of Fear. And, most of my videos are lucky if they get 500 views, and this one got 13,000.
Wow.
So I'm not monetized yet, but that was sort of an interesting dipping my feet into the waters of how that might go about. But I just had to kind of laugh at how it's not so surprising, because obviously it's based on the new series. It's so up to date, and I'm doing stuff that's 40 years old mostly, but it was rather gratifying that people was interested in it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, we would dream of tens of thousands. I think about 500 is kind of typical for one of our episodes too. Okay, and I guess for those of you listening, just wanted to say thanks for all your kind words about our recent Sensorite episode. I mean, whilst it wasn't necessarily one of the biggest listener numbers that we've had, we've never had so much engagement, I think, from listeners who enjoyed that particular one. So, and it's always lovely to hear what you think. So if you do listen to something and you wanted to tell us about it, then we'd always love to hear from you. So thanks for that. We look forward to hearing from you, perhaps about this one. So let's move on then to talking about The Chase. 6-part story written by Terry Nation and directed by Richard Martin. I mean, I guess it's a similar story to when I talked about the Sensorites last time. You know, like most of the extant Hartnell and Troughton stories, I first saw this in about the late 90s on UK Gold, you know, many years, I guess, after I came across the synopsis. And I've watched it a few times in between. And of course, you know, most recently, just a week or so ago. What about the rest of you? How did you come across The Chase?
I think it was probably bookie video off of BSB or one of the early people that did they transmit it? Yeah, probably was fairly high up on the. Yeah, I think I saw it fairly early on in the era of that sort of thing. And then was this one of the ones that John Peel novelised? Was it one of the late?
That sounds right.
It was indeed, yes, yeah. I remember being fascinated and captivated by it when Doctor Who Weekly or Monthly did its weekly, did the archive, and it sounded fantastic based on that early summary. So it was a bit of a jolt to see it, and I think the quality of the video that I would have watched it on probably almost disguised. I was probably struggling so much through the picture quality and things that I think it's hard to make a fair assessment of it. Really,
I think for me, this was on video when I first saw it in the mid-90s, and there was a nice run of season 2 videos available, certainly in my local library. So there was Dalek Invasion, Rescue Romans, Chase, Time Meddler, and I just found myself in a cycle of comfort watching that sort of run of videos quite a lot in the mid-90s, and having a lot of affection for that real transitional period away from the TARDIS team as set out in Unearthly Child and what we end up with at the end of season 2. I wouldn't suggest for 1 minute that this is how people measure the quality of Doctor Who stories, but on Brick Pandorica, on my account, I keep returning to The Chase for a whole variety of Lego builds. So there's something about The Chase that visually appeals to me, has moments that stick in my mind, and I have a real soft spot for it. And hopefully over the course of the next hour we can work out why exactly that is.
So it's a triumph of ambition over practicality.
As often happens with Richard Martin Productions, it would seem. I guess I was lucky. We got it here on PBS probably in the late 80s.
Right.
And so, although, again, we were seeing the omnibus versions rather than episodically. So I did sort of miss out on some of those cliffhangers, or sometimes being sure exactly where they were. I did get to experience that for quite a bit of my, I guess it was still my childhood. I would have been 13 or 14 around then. So funny enough, I still enjoyed it, even though, as a teenager, I started to get more irritated about things about Doctor Who. I was more sensitive about it. But I kind of just love the Daleks. And so they really can't do much wrong in my mind. They certainly couldn't at that time. So I always found them so interesting and exciting to watch. And it was very, sweet and sad when Ian and Barbara left, because we'd seen them for so long. Although, of course, it hadn't been 2 years. For me, we got them, once a week. So we were done with the first 2 seasons in, what would that be, 12 weeks or something. But still, it was still something I enjoyed. I mean, it was very easy to roll my eyes at certain bits of it. I wasn't that critical, though. I've never really been that critical, at least to start with. I just go with my feelings so often. And this one, I was like, this is weird, but I like it. And I love the sounds of it. I, of course, was attracted to the score. I love the sound effects. I'm always big into sound effects as well as music. So, yeah, all of that coalesced to something that I would watch a lot when I was young.
Yeah, and it's funny, we've brought you back to the Empire State Building.
Strange.
I'm not sure we did that deliberately, but yeah.
Well, it was all four of us on that same podcast.
It was, yeah.
Even the Daleks
Yeah.
in Manhattan. And I remember, Jess, you saying that one of the things you liked about Doctor Who was its Britishness. When it took place in the United States, you were slightly put off by that. And there is possibly no greater irritation than the way it is portrayed in The Chase. How did you cope?
Well, fortunately, it was brief, and it was fine. You know, I didn't get that worked up over it. I mean, you should have seen me over the gunfighters, but it was okay, and I got over it. I mean, I hadn't ever been to New York at that point, and it would still be several years until I moved here, and so New York was just this Gotham place of the imagination. And what's fun about that is it's kind of a interesting crowd of the hillbilly and some of the tourists and so on. It's quirky. I can see it that way now. But yeah, I probably would have been like, okay, this is only on for about 6 minutes. It'll be okay.
Did you have your Morton Dill moment when you moved to New York?
Well, I think everybody who first comes to New York is a bit of a fish out of water. Especially, I didn't exactly come from a small town. I'm from a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Mm-hmm. That's not a huge place, but it's no New York. And so it was quite a shock, but I was lucky enough to move here for school and I was going to get my master's degree in music. And so you sort of have a community that you make almost right away when you're going to school somewhere, when you're surrounded by your peers and indeed the people that you will continue to work with, it turns out, for much of your adult life. So that was a nice cushion moving to New York. But I mean, there was always those moments when you come out of the subway and you have absolutely no idea where you are. And you just lose your bearings entirely. And that took a while to get used to. But I've always been a bit of a naive person. So, there was a few times when I gave some money to someone on the street and afterwards I was like, yeah, they were conning me. But so in that sense, I was a bit of a rube, but nothing to make me go to Bellevue. That's for sure.
So having talked about where we watched it first, The Chase is a great example of it's important to know where you watched it last, because there seem to be so many variations between what you can see on DVD, VHS, and as it turns out, iPlayer. And the two of you, Richard and Giles, as you say, went to the Riverside.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess the interesting thing about the Riverside one is that it's an older copy. So as Gav pointed out, and he's got a video out at the moment on YouTube where he runs through episode 6. But he pointed out that on that old film copy, there's a bunch of flaws that they've subsequently fixed on the DVD and the Blu-ray, so you can't actually see some of the issues that are on it. You can see some of them, but not all of them. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, I was lucky that I went to the Blu-ray because one of you had mentioned that when you go to iPlayer, it's missing the all-important Beatles segment. So I remembered that we had it on the season 2 Blu-ray. Otherwise, they'd have been diving into the loft trying to look through DVD cases, which would probably have been a bit of a nightmare.
You've squashed our favourite Beatles.
Indeed.
Yes, that's one of the weird things with rewatching the edited and the attempts at correction and things. That there was, as is my manner, I had the production subtitles by the pianist Richard Bignell up at the same time, and it makes a comment about watch out for the continuity error coming up. I think it's the bit where the Dudley falls into the pit.
Yes.
Watch out for the continuity error where it's suddenly daylight. And of course the restoration team have taken it upon themselves to fix it.
Right. So there's no error anymore.
So there's no error, and yet the subtitles don't. I'm not sure whether they put that on as an extra on the DVD somewhere. I didn't get a chance to go through all the additional materials.
Going back to the iPlayer version, I was quite surprised, not necessarily because the bit with the Beatles in is cut. You know, who are we to say what licensing challenges that would have posed? But they take quite a huge cut out of that section, nearly 2 minutes of it. And what you lose is Barbara and Ian's reaction to the Queen Elizabeth court scene, as well as the Beatles element, which seems a shame, I think, for people coming new to Classic Who through the iPlayer. They're missing bits that the rest of us have been able to enjoy from time to time.
I was offended when I heard that it was going to be cut out of the American version, and that was actually, I believe, the first time I ever went so far as to buy a DVD from the UK rather than wait for it to come out in America, because I simply did not want to have a chase without the Beatles in it. Funny enough, at that time, I remember that somehow it actually ended up being close to the same price, or if not cheaper, to send for it all the way from Britain. So I was like, why should I not do this? So I did it for a few other stories that I'm sorry to say, thought less than worthy. But that was one that I did for that reason only. And so, same for the season 2 collection. Right. I got that straight from the UK rather than messing around with anything I was going to get annoyed with.
The other travesty, I suppose, if you lose that section, is you don't get Ian's dancing, which is, a vitally important part of it, isn't it?
You miss a lot, yeah. You watch, Dad is so funny when he dances.
That's odd that they've cut, if they've cut additional stuff in the front of that, unless it absolutely leans into, unless it absolutely is an unavoidable thing. But I don't recall it being that interleaved. I thought those things were quite episodic. But the little segments of what people want to see.
It's nice, I think, that whole segment, you've got the driving force, I suppose, of Vicky being a bit bored, but there's a nice bit of comic byplay between the Doctor and Vicky at the start. You've got Ian reading science fiction, there's a bit of a joke, and so on and so on. But it sort of feels like it's a good opportunity for the TARDIS crew to sort of have a bit of downtime together before we get into the adventure proper.
Listeners, you cannot tell this right now, but I am wearing my Monsters in Outer Space t-shirt in honor of this occasion. So that says something about me and about this story. I wanted to go back and say I really like the idea of comparing the original versions, because we're sort of losing a lot when we get these improvements. As nice as some of those improvements are, we're missing out on some of it. I mean, it's a flaw, but there is something charming about it. And I really like that they were able to present that, and that Gav did a video about that. I think that's a great idea, and I hope he continues to, be involved in something like that, because it is actually interesting.
Yeah, it feels like it's the same argument that people have about the original Star Wars films, that they've been improved in inverted commas so many times, but many people just want to see the original versions because they're what we remember viewing many years ago.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think we're back into that personal preference territory with some of this. I like to know that the original is available to watch, warts and all.
Yes.
The danger is, at what point does that become unwatchable? And my son and I, William, have just been watching The Reign of Terror on iPlayer, and their version of episode 1 is almost unlistenable to, and we switched to DVD pretty quickly on that. So that's a personal preference. I just want it tidied up so that it's a pleasant viewing and watching experience. But equally, there are people out there who absolutely want to see special effects modernised, and that's fine. That's a personal preference thing. I guess, you put 100 Who fans in a room, they're going to have 100 different versions of how far they want to take that. And I just want, I guess, to be able to access the original where available, and then make my choice on a DVD or Blu-ray, how far I take it. And generally they offer those options, don't they, at the moment?
So what do we think then of the Doctor and his companions having a look back into history? Is that a fun segment?
Yeah, it is kind of fun. It occurred to me that it's a bit of a history video jukebox. It's kind of a chance to not quite stick in a coin, but call up the clips in history that you want to see. Speaking of Gav, he did a video on this, I think, which basically pointed out the potential horror of actually being able to do that and being able to look in literally any part of history. But it's fun, and as you say, especially when it comes to the Beatles clip, it gives us a chance to actually kind of remind ourselves that Vicky is from the future. We don't always get as much as that she's very smart and she's from the 26th century or something like that. And we are reminded of that because the Beatles is well past history for her. Kind of like as we see ancient New York is another wonder that she gets to experience. And so we get to watch the companions react in wonder and incredulity that this is the case with her. So that's fun. And as I know we're going to get into, there's a surprising amount of humor in this story relative to a lot of other stories. The Romans is really the only one that can compare, I dare say. And, hit or miss, but Terry Nation did write for what's his name? Terry Hancock? Is that his name?
Tony Hancock.
Tony Hancock,
yes.
Excuse me. I apologize. Tony Hancock. So, he did have comedy writer on his CV. So it's an interesting experiment in what to do with the Daleks after two goes. It's an interesting thought.
Talking of which, I believe one of the various channels on satellite, high up on the satellite numbers, is just about to rerun for the first time ever the ABC Tony Hancock series, which is the one that Terry Nation was. It's the
okay.
After he left the BBC, where he worked with the famous Gordon and Simpson writing team, who went on to do Steptoe and Son and things like that.
Yeah,
and he went off to ITV or ABC, which was one of the branches of ITV at the time, or was it ATV? One of them anyway.
Yeah.
And so I gather that that's the first time they're being shown. So it'd probably be quite interesting for any Nation aficionados to actually track them down and see what he was up to on that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that in my own childhood that people sort of turned their nose up at Morecambe and Wise once they'd moved across to ITV after being on the BBC. But I mean, I lapped it up quite happily in the early 80s, and it'd be interesting to see whether you still sort of find it funny without the great writing. I mean, I don't know, maybe Terry Nation's brilliant, but I guess it sort of feels unlikely it'd be quite at the Galton and Simpson level. It's interesting with Terry Nation because he does have this reputation as having been a comic writer, but at the same time I can't think of any other script that he's written that has humour in it in the Doctor Who. It seems his stories are kind of relentlessly humorless, really.
Well, there's the Feast of Stephen.
Right.
That would be about it.
So you say to yourself, well, how much did Dennis Spooner have to do? But I mean, when I'm looking through the notes, it suggests that actually Dennis Spooner didn't have an awful lot of influence on these scripts. So I guess it must have come from Terry Nation.
I can't remember the source that Richard Bignell was quoting on the production subtitles, but he quoted an interview with Terry Nation from around this time, where he was appeared to be on a bit of a downer about the popularity of the Daleks, and was just saying, well, it's what the BBC wants, so I'm giving them a third and giving them this new Dalek story. He also, I think, hinted that in his opinion, people were going off that whole pop group thing. Pop groups were a fading fad, and the Daleks seem to have taken over. So in that context, it's quite interesting that he came up with this idea of doing a skit on the Beatles having a 50th anniversary reunion concert or whatever was the something along those lines was the original idea. And then I'm not quite sure how far that got past Brian Epstein.
Yeah, which is interesting because I mean 50th anniversaries is very much a la mode, but it doesn't feel like it was the anniversaries were quite such a big thing back in the 60s.
It's interesting, this broadening it out slightly. It does feel like, yeah, I was noticing things that very much reminded me of Feast of, across the various episodes. There's quite a few things that reminded me of Feast of Stephen. It does
Right.
feel like each of these little episodes is quite often it's Terry Nation reaching into his grab bag of things that either interest him or irritate him, or something like that. So it's just like you've got two kind of things that would have been staples of look and learn or kind of mystery books, because the Shakespeare skit obviously recognises, references the whole theory about Francis Bacon having been involved in writing Shakespeare's plays, and then you've got the Marie Celeste, which is obviously classic schoolboy mysteries of the world kind of stuff, and then you've got I can't help but think that because the Empire State Building, when we come to it, is quite funny, the whole way he's parodying, pastiching the tourist party. You've got the sort of rocker boy. You've got a couple of. It feels like it's slightly underplayed, but there's presumably a young woman who's meant to be quite attractive that Morton Dill is quite often glancing at. You've got the bumpkin. You've got the lady with the feathery hat.
Mm-hmm.
Who's and the way they're all. And then you got the inexplicable South African tour guide.
Well, he doesn't sound tour guide.
No,
he sounds film and TV Brooklyn is basically what he sounds like.
Yes, yeah.
But yes, he has a strangely Dutch name, I think. But it's not ever. It's like, I think it's documented in one place. Because I just watched it, and I also am a big fan of the production subtitles. So I noticed that it's not in the script.
Henry de Voort, apparently, in some of the documentation.
Correct. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But
So-
hey,
But he seems to be working out some of his things, and then obviously when we get to, well, between Morton Dill's sort of fascination with Hollywood and being convinced that it's all part of some candid camera type stunt, and then we get the haunted house episode later. That all feels like it's stuff that's going to be revisited and remixed a bit in Feast of Stephen as well, I think, in some ways.
Yeah.
I think what we're describing here, though, is you never really know where you are with the chase. As a viewer, you're always being flung between the tone of comedy in certain situations, an attempt to generate real suspense and fear in certain other elements. And for me, that's highlighted particularly with the House of Horror scene, where the Doctor and Ian are paired off, taking it all quite lightheartedly in terms of this all looks a bit silly, whereas the pairing of Vicky and Barbara are really trying to invoke that this is a scary place. This is genuine terror for them, and one way or another, this story just flips between the two continually, even during the quote unquote serious bits on Iridia and on Mechanos. There's still those moments that swing violently between the two tones, and it draws me in. That I'm always watching it, trying to work out, well, what is this trying to be as a story? What makes this a complete whole of a story? Because it just seems to be so many bitty parts strung together. Does it really work? Does it really flow? Is there genuinely a beginning, middle, and end to this story?
it does have that issue of tone. I remarked upon that myself when I was watching episode 2, The Death of Time, where I suddenly realized after a lightness of tone in the first episode, it's very dark for a lot of the second episode, save with a silly Dalek interchange where the one goes, yes, yes, and then it finally gets told to go do the job. That is actually quite enjoyable. Then suddenly the silly taunting of the Dalek, which gets it tempted to fall down the pit, and they eventually get in the TARDIS. There's the origins of the cult of Skaro, Dalek Fred and Dalek Archie. But most of that episode is really quite dark. Surprisingly, because as like I said, episode 1 and quite a bit of episode 3 is on the lighter side, and even episode 4, although like you were talking about the haunted house stuff, most of them are giving a go at making it seem scary. Even Ian has a rather funny jump scare with the doctor, but I don't think you're supposed to take it seriously, which is good. But at the same time, is that the tone we're supposed to be having with the Daleks? That's something my teenage brain would have thought. I was like, I don't know. I know the Daleks don't like stairs, but are we supposed to be mentioning that? Ian, thank you. It's a funny juggling of the tone, and eventually it has to kind of settle down into seriousness in episodes 5 and 6. But it is curious. And meanwhile, back in the first episode, a lot of it is nothing happening. That whole thing with the time-space visualizer takes up, a third of the episode? Maybe more?
Uh-huh.
And then, yes, they eventually find out about the danger, but Ian and Vicky are already off having their adventure, which actually brings up something I really like. I like that they don't all learn about the threat at once. And Vicky and Ian both have to discover it by peeking out of the airlock and discovering the Dalek guarding the TARDIS. I rather like that. So they don't get to know about it until the end of episode 2.
It's interesting because episode 1, it occurred to me that after the lengthy preamble with the time space visualizer, episode 1, the rest of it is quite what we expect from the opening episode of a Hartnell science fiction story, which is them wandering around on a weird planet, having weird encounters or things like that, and then just building up to some reveal or something at the end of the episode, but largely being just a four-hander, really, except we've got a couple of bits of Dalek cutaway, to coin a phrase. And the other weird thing, I still can't work out why the Gettysburg Address. Is that just some educational remit thing? I can't quite work out why it's so high on Ian's Ian's wish list to see.
And it's another very American thing. I didn't have to, but I know at one time, school children were required to memorize the Gettysburg Address. So it's interesting why that and not why not something, shall we say, British? Some famous Churchill speech or something,
Or sciencey. Why not the apple? Why not Newton and the apple?
Oh, golly, yes.
Or
that's a point.
Given that Ian's the science teacher.
Very good point. Yeah. But that was an inconsistency that bothered me too in that spot, because he also, when the doctor quotes Venderham's or Venderman's law about masses absorbed by light, la la la. He looks at the doctor as if he's got 3 heads, but he's the science teacher. So that's an inconsistency that always slightly grates at me. Like, he should at least be a little bit more interested in that. It's not completely gobbledygook, but anyway, la-di-da.
I quite like with Iridius that there's dark and there's light. They're sort of thinking about that. I mean, it's kind of basic, but time is passing and conditions change. So that's quite good. Is this the only time also that we hear Hartnell singing? It's a little snatch of song when he's sunbathing on the sands.
That's a good question. I mean, seems like he might at some point be idly singing at the console somewhere. I can sort of picture that in my mind, but I can't at the moment point to anything where that might happen. But no, it is rather singular. So singing is a connection to come, isn't it?
Doesn't get up to anything in the Romans, does he?
No.
Rick, go on.
He just tries to play a musical instrument in the Romans, doesn't he? That's his musical contribution.
Yes, yeah.
Right. It's not vocal. It's just
I was just wondering whether anything might come up at that point.
But I found it quite jarring seeing the Doctor sunbathe on Iridia with Barbara.
Yeah.
There are lots of things that I should really be embracing and enjoying about seeing the downtime of the TARDIS team. They seem to embrace that better in the Romans than they do in the Chase. It seems a bit more forced. And even, Ian quite recklessly goes off with Vicky into the desert of Iridia, and that feels a bit atypical of Ian as well in terms of what we've seen of him to date. So there's lots of things that, like I say, just tonally, characterisation are quite challenging to me about this story, and I think again that's what makes me want to watch it over and over to say, did I really see that? Did they really do that? The point that you make, Richard, about them showing time passing in Iridia is really well done. The way night falls on Ian and Vicky is a scene that I really liked, and it happens again in the story in reverse when you get daybreak on Mekanos and the Mechanoid city suddenly appears. Now, whether that's done on purpose as a clever bit of storytelling and positioning in the story, or just simply happened by accident, who knows? But they're two nice touches at either end of this story. I also think, contrary to Richard Martin's comments in the DVD extras, I quite like the Iridians. I like their costumes. I think it makes them look suitably 60s aliens. They act it well, and they're just enough to keep that story ticking along in parts 1 and 2. And they allow the Doctor and his companions to play off each other and the situation, because there's that kind of almost quadruple threat that is going on. There is the threat of detonation, the threat of the Maya Beast, the threat of the Daleks, and the threat of the Iridians handing the Doctor over to the Daleks. So in truth, they built up a lot of jeopardy in that element of the story. Whether that translates for me as a viewer into, oh my gosh, how are they going to possibly get out of all these situations? I don't know. There's something a bit pedestrian that gets them to the conclusion of simply escaping into the TARDIS through the nearest available exit. But there's lots to like in that situation. I like the cavern set as well, the way that it's on multiple levels, and it's got a bit of interest to it.
Yes, yeah, that's true. But Terry Nation seems to have had, again, his the tonal thing, that he seems to have had very different ideas about what the Iridians would look like. He almost sounds like he wanted them to look like flatfish, almost like their faces would be in the middle of their bodies.
Right.
Apparently. And yes, the Maya Beasts and so on. There was apparently, when it sounds like Verity Lambert was having to imprint her ideas that she didn't want the Iridians to look as horrific as Terry Nation wanted them to do, and she sold Terry Nation on the idea that the Maya Beast should be somewhat less front and centre than he was suggesting at any rate. We're saying, I think they'd be much more effective if they kept as the shadows and only seen in glimpses. Plus, remember the slider.
Yes, yes. Apparently she brought that up specifically.
Yes.
And it's right. The Maya Beast is pretty good in the dark. With a few side shots, not quite completely full on. It works all right. I mean, both the Maya Beast and the fungoids later have the problem of, if you touch them, they're paper thin, and they sound. There's a sound to them which doesn't sound organic. But I mean, that would be done differently now, of course. It's not a big deal. But ultimately, I think the Maya Beast does okay. In the dark, certainly. The cliffhanger of episode 1 for Ian and Vicky is pretty good.
That's effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the sort of polystyrene blocks when it bursts through there that it's a little bit less convincing, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel the Iridians hold up. The Maya Beast and the fungoids are best witnessed.
I agree.
Best witnessed in standard definition at best, in dim lighting, and possibly Blu-ray does neither of them any favours.
Yeah, so this is where my Enter-Generation videotapes in the early 90s probably came in handy. That it was of uncleaned up stuff.
Also, I guess probably not as relevant at the time, but there's the whole kind of climate change thing on Iridius as well. That it was a watery planet. The sun's moved closer. Well, I suppose the planet must. Can a planet move closer to two suns simultaneously? I suppose it possibly could.
Yeah.
And the seas have dried up. But yeah, so it's something that probably means a little bit more to us now than it would have done at the time.
I think the fact it was called Ovidius but was originally an ocean planet is a bit.
Yes.
That's the only thing. Have they renamed it, or was it? Yeah.
Yes, that's a bit of a nation error, as usual. What's the planet like? I shall name it that way.
There's odd things that over ambitious. Richard Martin trademark things. The whole business with Dalek buried in the sand, where they buried a real Dalek in the sand, and couldn't drag it out. But then,
even them having to walk the Dalek casings as well a bit too.
yes, yeah. There's that early sign of Dalek levitation. At least you don't see feet under. I don't think there's these scenes where you spot a Dalek operator's feet.
I think they just get away with it.
They're a bit weird. But then the odd thing that the counterparts of the Dalek in the Sands at the end of episode 2 is that they apparently really did dig a giant hole in the sand on Camber Sands. Was it they filmed this?
Mm-hmm.
They paid some local to dig a big hole in the sand and then chucked a Dalek down it using some kind of spring trap for that scene. It seems like
That poor Dalek was probably shedding sand for years.
Well, quite, yes. You wonder what state it was in, considering how bashed up they often were, and so as Gav's chronicled, yeah. And what is it with the Daleks making their weird sounds in this?
Yeah,
You get the grumbly one as he comes out of the sand, and then the ones that get asked awkward questions and go
Yeah, the stupid ones.
Yes,
The
yeah.
grunts, the grunt Dalek.
Yeah, I mean, is that I don't know how much of that is scripted versus. I guess it must have been scripted, and it's definitely, as you said, that whole thing with the the bitchy bit where where the Dalek goes yes, and the other one, well, see to it. He's obviously having some fun with it from that point of view.
Yeah, I think it must be part of having a go at his own creations.
Yeah.
I just think the Daleks just fit into this being tonally weird. They grunt and groan. They seem to give each other sarcastic looks, if Daleks can give sarcastic looks. They talk it in unusual terms as well. Late on, the Daleks talk about rejoicing in battle. It's all very, very unlike what we've seen of the Daleks before, and thankfully, by the time we get to the Dalek Master Plan, that the Daleks are back on consistent form again. It is a very, very quirkily written story, and I would love to see who it was who was really driving some of this tone as well. You'd think by then there were people who knew what Doctor Who was about, knew what happened in Doctor Who, and could perhaps put this on the right track a bit earlier. It is left, I think, to go a bit wild throughout, and the Daleks are just another good example of that.
They at least have the benefit of being able to take everything at face value, so they don't question that they're in a haunted house. They're never going to think critically about that. They just are where they are. They also have the benefit of puncturing the Doctor's theory about it being the haunted house being in an area of human thought. They've passed into some other dimension which is not real, an amalgamation of people's nightmares, which is an interesting thought, but they're good for that. They're just like, no, we're just on Earth. Tonally, the Daleks still have some of their problems with the movements. I've always been obsessed with Dalek movement, and particularly in the black and white era, the Daleks move beautifully, in the sense that they are active, twitchy. It can go over the top, like the Daleks nodding their eye sticks in agreement.
Yeah.
At an order. No, it's true. It'd be nice if you had some way, apart from saying I obey, that they're going to do that. But those things, I think, for me, look silly. But other times the Daleks are doing interesting things. They're moving their little arms, and their eyes are moving around, and they're active. They're interesting. They're visually very interesting, and I think that got lost And so it's still interesting to watch Daleks at this period of time. So that's something I like about the characters, the creatures in this story, is that they're still very alive, and I find them very compelling to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me pondering whether, because we get Douglas Camfield in the next story, the Time Meddler, and you sort of wonder, well, you know, if you'd had him directing this rather than Richard Martin, what the outcome would have been. And I mean, there's aspects of the script that would have meant that the story would have been quite similar, but I suppose also, yeah, we might have got past some of the sort of shortcomings of the angles and whatever of some of the shots. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's impossible to say because we don't have that that artifact, the Douglas Camfield version. But you know, insofar as the chase is sometimes frustrating, I wonder how much of it's to do with its realisation and how much is to do with the sort of original script. We've got a long way into our discussion and we haven't discussed the music. And Jess, I feel like it's an omission thus far. This is relatively early, I think, in the Dudley Simpson career, I suppose, in Doctor Who.
It is. It's his third story. He has started to become a regular already, which is, you know, pretty impressive. Not that many composers got, you know, repeat opportunities after Norman Kay did several in the first season, and then we get a bit of Raymond Jones, who did The Romans and the Savages, and we get some repeats of Tristram Cary. That's kind of it. And so Dudley Simpson is starting to become slowly a regular, although apparently he was not Richard Martin's first choice. He wanted to get a composer called Max Harris, whose work I don't really know because I've never seen Doomwatch, I've never seen Porridge. These are later things that he did, where he wrote the title music for those shows. So I don't know what he was doing contemporaneously to this show. But alas, and that could actually be the reason why he was commissioned so quickly, because Crusade is only 2 stories ago. And so most of the time that didn't happen. And so could be the reason why he was at hand or in mind when he was commissioned. But it's a very, very distinctive score. And one thing that I find when we eventually talk about our second story of this diptych of stories here is that it's very piano-based. There's a very strong piano element to the score. That's often the driving part of it, either in a melodic sense or an accompaniment sense. But the piano has a lot of center stage music in this, which makes it very distinctive. I've heard people talk about this as a very jazzy score. Now, I take the term jazz more literally. I'm thinking like Ambassadors of Death when we talk about a jazz score. But it's very groovy, 100%. It's very groovy and very rhythmic. And, you know, it's some of the pieces sound like it's written for bass and drums and, you know, a few instruments added on top. So like a rhythm section of a band. But particularly one thing which ends up being kind of novel, innovative in this story, is that for 3 episodes, there is an opening theme to the story. There is that do-do-do-do-do-do-do. That stuff happens in the beginning of the first 3 episodes, but it doesn't remain for the rest of the time. And that is something that Simpson would actually continue to do where he could. He did it in The Celestial Toymaker. We get that in Ice Warriors and on through until such things didn't happen anymore. But that was a real first opportunity for him to have a kind of unifying theme, if you will, which in one of the suites that I transcribed, I was able to put together some of those cues that use that melodic material from the theme and make about 2.5 minutes of music from it, which was a lot of fun. And it's interesting. It goes right the way through the story. And there's a lot of music in it, and there isn't a lot of repetition at this time. Quite often cues would be reused, sometimes many times. There's actually a lot of music that's just used once. A little unusual here, but that certainly could happen.
I guess there's a lot of scene setting to do because it's switching around from between different scenarios. So obviously we get the pastiche Gershwin in the New York. Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of styles, from right from the off, some of the themes that emerge as sort of stings or as very quick, jolts of music, through to the Empire State Building, all the way to London 1965, which is charming.
Yeah.
And so, interestingly enough, it really shows a breadth of ability from Simpson. There's some really interesting, denser music that he makes in some parts, some really richer harmonies, but also some tunes. And it was easier to write tunes at this time because you were just writing moods, and then the director puts it where they want. But a lot of neat stuff, and a lot of percussion. Simpson always loved percussion. It's so evocative, whether it be drums and cymbals or xylophone, vibraphone, marimba. They're all in this. Those mallet percussion things work beautifully in all of those. And there's a fair amount of keyboard instruments as well, like I said, organ as well. There's a bit of celeste, which is that kind of bell sounding instrument, like Sugar Plum Fairy from the Nutcracker, that sort of sound. So it's interesting. And there's only 5 musicians. I have not determined, and I don't know if I ever could, whether Simpson is actually playing. There is a sort of mystery that I've made for myself here, I guess, as to how often Simpson actually played on his scores at this time, because he's listed as the conductor. And eventually that is basically what he did when he got around to overlaying synth stuff later on. He did that. But by and large, he just conducted. He did not play. But he's an accomplished pianist, so I always thought some of those could have been him. There's only a few instances that definitely say this is Simpson playing. As to whether it's, say, Leslie Pearson, who became his go-to keyboardist, who most famous for doing the organ stuff for Pyramids of Mars, Deadly Assassin. He was the organist on that, but he was also a fine keyboardist and a great sight reader. You always want that for recording sessions. Whether it's Simpson or Pearson, I don't know. Mystery that may never be solved, because a lot of these recordings don't have their personnel documented. So that's sort of sad in that way.
We need a time-space visualizer.
Yes. I'm busy working on it in my shed. But it's a curious score, but ultimately it's fun. I don't know if it's necessarily as appropriate. Like the weird sinisterness of the Celestial Toymaker maybe works a little better. It's almost the same instrumentation as the music of the Celestial Toymaker, and I think that really kind of dark, it's not exactly humor, but that kind of darkness that pervades that whole thing there really suits a lot of the music, whereas this is kind of a strange kind of jauntiness, and it works, and I like it because I love Simpson and always have. And obviously from a young age, that was one thing that drew me into some of these stories, is just because I love the music, even if I didn't know that that's what I liked. But it's an interesting score. Started to solidify Simpson as one of the house composers that they would call upon.
Yeah, and I think that at the very start, after the theme tune, whilst the episode title is coming up, Simpson has that piano piece, and that is one of the things I remember most about the chase. And I don't remember a lot of incidental music in Doctor Who, if I was to be honest, but that opening piece that I think you've covered on one of your YouTube videos just stays in my head and reminds me always of the chase. It's a great opening statement by Simpson.
Indeed, it's true. It really does stick with you. There's something very catchy about it, and kind of does a great job of preparing you for the episode to come. Because perhaps its jauntiness is its strength, because we discover soon that there's going to be some levity as we go along, as well as some seriousness, and there's a little bit of both, despite its very rhythmic character. There's a little bit of both in that theme. So, it does a good job of sending things off in 30 seconds.
I guess, some of the stuff that's hard to to fathom. I mean, there's a Dalek on the top deck in the Mary Celeste. It's not entirely clear how it gets up there or how it's going to get down again.
Yes.
There's that Dalek infamously in Frankenstein's monster's laboratory. It's there before the Daleks arrive.
Yes,
I mean, on the original videotape, I think it was very obvious. I think perhaps they've darkened it down or something on the Blu-ray. You can still see it, but it's not quite as glaringly obvious, I think, when I looked at it this time. But I mean, you've got to somehow get this thing done in 75 minutes, so you've got to have shortcuts, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think episode 4 ends up being the sloppiest of the lot for that reason, because it has to be. It's quite ambitious in what it's trying to do with its multi-levels.
Yeah,
and its different atmospheres and so on, but it doesn't come off, unfortunately. It's another scene in the Web Planet where nothing happens for 5 seconds because someone missed their cue. Unfortunately, that happened. I mean, goodness, considering how generally good most of the episodes are, it's really kind of stark, isn't it, when one of them doesn't go according to plan. And so, thankfully, I would say, at this period, it's fairly rare, despite the great potential for things to go awry. I mean, it's not live television, but it was very close to it.
Yeah.
But still, I like the other episodes. I don't think there was as much problem with the direction there. I mean, obviously, there's little things. There's the party of 2 different sized Daleks and camera 5 about to attack the cave in episode 5. I mean, that's always entertaining.
Yeah.
There's little things like that. There's a hand that appears in the background and pulls up
movie Dalek.
In a way, those are sort of fun Easter eggs to know that they're there. And if you would have caught them at the time, I mean, well done. But, we are dealing with. It's always good to remind yourself, take a deep breath and say, this was ephemeral television. Nobody expected this to still be something that we would watch now. So they got away with it.
So one question about episode 4 that came up, again on production notes, it suggests that the original cliffhanger to episode 3 was going to be Barbara disappearing into the revolving fireplace.
Yes.
So 7.5 minutes of the haunted house stuff were going to be in episode 3, which raises questions about what would have been cut from episode 3, or what got padded into. Hang on, which way around would it go?
It would be the other way around, yes, because
what got padded into episode 3 in order to fill out the space, and
or how did episode 3 get so long as to potentially have to cut 5-6 minutes and stick it into episode 4.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't look like they added anything to those sequences. I mean, sure, it could have been tightened up, but probably not by much.
I mean, obviously, it was all happening at the script writing stage, so it doesn't seem to be. But it was just it's put out there on the production notes, but I can't quite see how they could have padded either. I can't quite see where they could have cut stuff in episode 3 down that drastically or padded this one.
Yeah, what surprises me about that is on the DVD extra, it suggested that the building of the Mary Celeste in studio was where the money went. So you would have liked to have thought that got a decent slice of the 6 episodes on screen, and in truth, it is kind of boxed into half of episode 3, which seems a shame, because I think that money might well have been better spent elsewhere, where it was going to be on screen for much longer. But I generally, I know we talk about the haphazard production and the change in tones and all of that. I quite like episodes 3 and 4, and I think I'm relaxed into them now with each rewatch. They are genuinely quite witty. They are trying to provide a bit of change of scene for what is supposed to be a chase. By definition, they're going to have to go from location to location. I I do find the Empire State Building scene quite funny, largely because just how poorly represented that Morton Dill character is. The Marie Celeste is, I guess, kind of what I assume that Doctor Who will do. You know, it did it again with the Pudding Lane in Fifth Doctor stories, you know, where it's explaining, as you say, some sort of schoolboy, sort of typical history fact and tying it into the Doctor. And the House of Horror stuff, I think you take it as being really good fun. There are a couple of things in that are impactful. I think the Grey Lady laughing as she's exterminated is quite a strong image in that. The image of the Frankenstein's monster lifting the Dalek above shoulder height and slamming it on the floor wrestling style,
Yes,
I think is a really strong image. So those two parts aren't without their merits, but they do, I think, I do like the change of tone, actually, on reflection. I do think those episodes, you know, they're comfort watching in many respects. You know, they turn your brain off and just enjoy these set pieces for what they are before the story really tries to kick towards the conclusion in episodes 5 and 6.
It's interesting. We've got 3 of those first 4 episodes are definitely sort of episodes of 2 halves, because episode 1 you got roughly half in the TARDIS and the time space visualizer stuff, and then half on Iridius. Episode 3 is essentially 2 half episodes jammed together with a little bit into, you know, and then episode 4 is kind of, I was surprised that they sort of left Thorned out, thinking how much longer this episode is there still to go, where they sort of mostly setting up like Vicky being missing and the stuff on the Dalek spaceship in order to line up to the indistinguishable duplicate of the Doctor.
Yes, before we talk about that, I'm glad you brought up the idea of Vicky, Giles, because I actually think that's a tremendous twist. It's you know, it's yet another moment of sudden darkness, and let's remember, and they make this clear, the Doctor cannot go back for her.
Yes,
this is tragic, and it's almost too bad that it gets undercut by the fact that we see Vicky in the Dalek time machine. That could have been like a devastating cliffhanger when they're like, we've got to go back for her. We've got to fight the Daleks. We've got to take their time machine and go find her, and not know that she's managed to follow them to Mechanus until episode 5. I think that would have been tremendous. So that was a great twist. It could have been even twistier. And as we know, there is always a twist at the end. But I really find that to be a good turning point. You know, we were talking about how things really start to move in episodes 5 and 6. I would even argue they start to move right at that point where they discover Vicky's gone.
Yeah.
This is a really strong episode and story for Vicky. Definitely a step up from Susan in terms of how that character is used within the programme. And she has some great moments. Telling the Doctor she can fix the time-space visualizer at the start of the episode is a lovely moment. Her resourcefulness, faced, as you say, Jess, with an unprecedented situation of a companion being accidentally abandoned in space and time. She shows that resourcefulness. She is good in terms of how she handles the fact that she knows there is a duplicate Doctor on the loose. And really, apart from her showing fear of going down the cable in episode 6, she's a really strong, capable character. And she's so well acted as well. Really loved her in this story.
I agree, Rick. I think she was probably brought up just for her part was brought up, that is, because we now know what's about to happen to Ian and Barbara, and so her character gets stronger, and her relationship with the Doctor, although that was pretty well solidified by the Crusade, still it gets even stronger there, because now she's going to be the continuity between the original TARDIS crew. She's the surrogate Susan, And now that Ian and Barbara are gone, it really is just the Doctor. It might just be the Doctor who feels totally alone, but there is Vicky who's still there. And you're right. I think bringing her part up in the way that she did, and Maureen O'Brien certainly rose to the occasion. That was just what was needed there.
I hadn't appreciated, of course, that the whole thing about them planning to steal the Dark time ship because it is steerable. That sort of foreshadows or sets up the idea that Ian and Barbara will then be able to use it to get home. At least, and it doesn't heavily, but it makes it less of a jolt. And I've forgotten that comes up as a plot point, because it then makes it less of a jolt when they have the idea at the end. Because considering way back when we did Dalek Invasion of Earth, I was pleasantly surprised by the fact they do seed that Susan and David are having a romance of sorts in their very stilted way, but you get the impression it's building to something, and I'd always thought, and then Ian and Barbara rather get written out without there being much build up to the idea, but this at least is some hint of it there. And of course, we then get the sort of double bluff that we don't that when we don't know that Stephen has reached the TARDIS. The last we see of him, he's being grabbed by the fungoids. And presumably we don't know how it was publicised at the time, whether people knew that he was then going to be the new companion, and whether they were queued up for that in this episode, and so it raised questions of, well, hang on, no, it can't be, because he's been left on the planet. Honestly, don't know, but I do find it rather, the only thing is I do find it rather puzzling that everyone says that everyone was so impressed by Peter's performance as Morton Dill that they instantly thought, that's that guy.
Right.
I think that
they were so
more likely
he got on well with Bill Hartnell side of it. Is more convincing. But
that could be.
I don't see much in the Morton Dill performance that's.
I mean, I guess they've got a week in the rehearsal room, haven't they, together, and that's probably where it's come from, rather than what you see on the camera. In episode 5, I think the previous time I watched episode 5, I got really kind of fed up with it. Actually, watching it through this time, I think what it boils down to is that you've just got to get it out of your head when Edmund Warwick is playing the Doctor or the robot, and when it's William Hartnell. You just have to. If you sort of say, look, the two are interchangeable, either of them could be playing either part, then it sort of works okay. It's because you get it into your head, well, the Doctor's Jubilee doesn't look much like the Doctor, but then the fact that they keep swapping parts all the way through just makes it all the more confusing. I guess if you were watching it on a 12-inch screen, black and white, with interference on the picture, you squinting in the dark or something, you might possibly think they looked identical.
Yeah, I'd much rather they'd have just gone all in for them playing the robot and the genuine Doctor. The fact that they interchange is exactly what breaks you out of that suspension of disbelief, which is a shame, because I like a lot about episode 5, possibly what I feel is the strongest episode, because I think they weave the separation and the mixing of the combinations of characters very well to play that robot Doctor Who card. It's only that the jarringness of sometimes the robot is William Hartnell that breaks you out of it and unnecessarily confuses something, which I'd be happy to suspend my disbelief that the robot Doctor Who doesn't really look like William Hartnell,
Yeah, I think it's odd because because we all would have read about this before we saw it, or most of us at any rate, Jess. I think we were all brought up on the idea that, oh yes, it's the episode with the duplicate Doctor Who and the duplicate's played by Edmund Warwick. I think we all knew that bit. And so our expectation coming into it is always that, Warwick's always going to be the evil, the robot, and Hartnell's always going to be the real thing. And so it's just weird when the episode doesn't match up to that sort of prior expectation.
Yeah, the received wisdom is tough to shake.
Yeah. So I think it's reasonably yeah, I guess it's an intelligent way of doing it, and they're trying to get as much. Yeah, from I can kind of see their point of view that at the time of the production, they're trying to get as much Hartnell face time
Yes.
as possible, one way and another, and to cut down on having too many, too many close-ups of Warwick, except for the cases where they can't. But it's just weird. Like at the end of episode 4, you get one shot of him dubbed, and then the next shot cuts straight to Hartnell himself saying his next line. Just
Yeah, it was too jarring, that, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
But I think I can sympathise with what they were trying to do there, and I just don't think it doesn't work all that well with to modernise.
At least they could get it right with the beginning of the fight because they pre-recorded that. I understand, and so that's why they were able to. Although I don't think they showed them on the same shot, they couldn't, but they did cut from Hartnell to Hartnell to Hartnell as they're like baiting each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were able to do that, but it just wasn't feasible, unfortunately, to do that every time.
Yeah.
But for example, they do have William Hartnell go into the cave and bait Barbara out of the cave.
Yes.
So they got away with it a few times, and as long as he's in long shot, as you say, in their small 12-inch television, probably got away with it. When they unfortunately chose to zoom in, then it's so obvious that I think it's like the Meyer Beast. You got to show it in the dark, or you've got to show it at a distance. Otherwise, it spoils the illusion, and you are trying to create an illusion here.
Yeah.
I really like that game, though, in episode 5, in terms of the robot doctor trying to lure the characters apart. And I possibly have overthought that the card played by the robot Doctor Who when he says that Ian's dead to Barbara. Barbara possibly underreacts to that. You would be devastated, I think, or you would like to think Barbara would be devastated like that. Or potentially, she's become so accustomed to the impossible that there's something within her that refuses to believe that to be true. But it's an odd card, as I say, to play, because the potential for it to be disproven, as it is by Ian turning up, is quite significant. As I say, though, there are a lot of Doctor Who's that we will have watched where it's just endless backwards and forwards. There was a danger that occurred in episode 5, and I think it got away with it quite nicely. And then I really like the cliffhanger. For one reason or another, they've run out of options, haven't they, in that cave? The inevitability that finally the chase is over, finally the Daleks have caught up with them, is right there. And then, obviously, the doorway opens, the mechanoid is there. It looks massive. And I always I kind of shrink them in my mind between watches, and then I watch the chase again, and wow, they are massive beings. And it really looks like an out of the frying pan into the fire type of cliffhanger ending, where they have no choice but to go from one danger into what looks like another perilous situation. And again, a really strong episode, ends strongly for me.
I thought you were about to nick my line there, which only just occurred to me, but if you've got a moment, it's a Deus Ex Mechanoid ending to that episode.
No.
There we go.
I think the only other thing I say on episode 5 is that whole shtick. It makes me think. I'm not quite questioning Terry Nation's professionalism, but I'm starting to think: was he so convinced that the BBC could work miracles? Because the whole concept of that, he must have had some understanding of the mechanics of how they were recording these things, and so the whole concept of doing the duplicate doctors having a fight and things like that. And you get the impression these days that if you were being asked to script anything like that, these days it wouldn't be quite the same challenge, because you can cut between. You're not trying to do continuous recording for one thing, but you do slightly wonder whether he was writing this stuff and thinking, oh yeah, they'll sort it out because they can work wonders. And maybe someone should have said, yeah, this probably needs, if you want to do this damn stupid thing, don't do it in this damn stupid way.
I've just been watching that again. I That's what I think. I mean, it seems like the sort of thing that gets nipped and tucked in the rewriting. That's the sort of thing where typically that would be, okay, we can't really do this. What can we do? They let a lot get through there. And so that's, what obviously makes it so ambitious. But no, not a lot of, with the exception of, some nicer looking Iridians, a lot got through there without saying, can we do this?
There's so much happens in episode 6. I guess, you get introduced properly to the mechanoids. You've got Stephen.
Yeah.
You've got Daleks against mechanoids. You've got escaping from the city. And then you've got quite a lengthy segment saying goodbye to Ian and Barbara as well. So it achieves an awful lot. And it's quite a satisfying end to the story. I mean, I suppose except insofar as the Doctor doesn't have an awful lot of agency in it. It sort of feels like everything does get wrapped up and there's still a decent amount of time to say goodbye to Ian and Barbara.
So a couple of thoughts on what you've just said, Richard. The first one is, it's a 6-part story with 3 split episodes in it. First one split between Fun in the TARDIS and Iridia, the split between the Empire State Building and the Mary Celeste, and then episode 6 is split between concluding the chase and the departure of Ian and Barbara, which again leads to a very odd pacing of Doctor Who episodes where you're used to, even in Keys of Marinus, pretty much a storyline lasting a whole episode or a scenario. We don't necessarily get that in the chase. The second element that you talked about, I think, is a key point for me about the chase and why it is a switch your brain off, curl up on the sofa, just watch it through, which is the Doctor, you're right, does not have agency. It is very much a story where something happens, then something else happens, then something else happens, and it leads to something else and leads to something else. It is literally a chase. There's no greater complexity to it than that. And even when there is some talk in the latter episodes between particularly Ian and the Doctor about, well, we're going to need to be smart here about where we make our stand against the Daleks. So it looks like there is some sort of positive thinking and decisioning that is going to take place to resolve this. Indeed, decision is in the title of the final episode. Really, what happens is their luck runs out in the jungle of Mechanos. The fungoids block the TARDIS. They're forced into the cave. So they're forced into, that's where they're going to need to make their stand. They don't even make their stand in there. That fails. They get the lucky escape with the mechanoid arriving, a bit like they get the lucky escape when the Maya Beast crashes through the polystyrene wall. And actually, they don't even need to set light to the city. That seems almost a shame because the Daleks are fully engaged with the mechanoids. That neither the mechanoids or the Daleks are going to get to the balcony. They have their escape route that Ian has improvised with the cable, and they make their escape. So, it's a very passive story for all the TARDIS team. They're effectively running. There's a bit of tomfoolery with the robot Doctor Who and, who do you trust? But fundamentally, it is a passive, just got to run from one situation to another for the team.
Right. And everything that happens, they just have no choice. It has to be that way.
Yeah. And the TARDIS takes them to the,
if they want to make
through
it.
no choice, to the next destination that they have to somehow go out, see whether that's where they're going to make their stand, and decide just quite passively, right, we're running out of time, we need to get back into the TARDIS and go to the next destination.
Forgive me if I'm possibly, maybe I missed something. Well, but the machine that the Doctor makes and carries around on Mechanus, and he says, I'm just scanning through a transcript, and it says the only reference it comes up with is there's something I haven't told you, my dear boy. We cannot use this machine in an enclosed area, otherwise we should all go up in smoke. But what's the machine meant to do, and what happens to it?
I mean, it seems very ineffective. I mean, eventually it seems to kill one Dalek
Right.
in that kind of final melee. But it doesn't, if all it was going to do is blow up once and get rid of one Dalek, it's not entirely clear how the Doctor thought this was going to be the saviour.
I think, though, it's implied that it does, to your point, Richard, only seem to take out one Dalek. But then when they look back up at the city, when they've made it to the ground, it seems to have started off a chain of events that has burnt the city.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's how I took it, the implication.
City of the Mechons.
Right. That does make sense, although, again, we then see the Daleks and the Mechanoids just completely, annihilate each other. So that might very well have happened without the Doctor's device. But yes, I think it does. It is meant that it is the flame that started.
Right.
Right. I think.
Yes. And there the chase ends, and the success of the Doctor and Ian, Barbara and Vicky is they simply, in the end, outran the Daleks. And then conveniently, they are left with 2 time machines. The TARDIS, as I believe we are meant to refer to it as, which is...
I don't know if we are, Rick.
Well,
I don't know.
I've just done it. It's extremely odd from the outside, which is covered in another entertaining Dalek 6388 video, plug for them. Gav's work. And has a really nice interior set. I like the whole black and white swirly video screens and things like that. Fundamentally, though, it is the way out for Ian and Barbara, and I really like that exchange between Ian and Barbara where Barbara poses the question, do we want to go home? Is this our way home? I think it's really well acted and very consistent. There are some companion departures that we can argue come completely out of the blue, but right from the off, one of the themes has been, you've abducted us, Doctor, get us home. And he's failed to do so, and here's their opportunity. And I think it's very consistent in terms of 2 years worth of storyline in Doctor Who. And Richard Smith, do you feel that you are channeling your inner Ian in your life? Because all he wants in life is a pint in a pub, a walk in a park, and watch cricket.
Yeah, I know. I noted it down. Basically, it wasn't for beer and cricket. He might well have hung around for a bit longer. But there's obviously no beer or cricket in the TARDIS, so he has to go back to Earth. I mean, Barbara seems quite keen as well, but it's less clear what her motivations are.
Is that your live? Is that your live, laugh, love, Richard?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have recently. In the last month, I went to watch Hampshire in the county championship, so I could, just sit down for a day, watch the cricket, drink a bit of beer, have something nice for lunch, and get away from work for a day. So yeah, I very much sympathise with Ian in this regard.
That does sound nice, I'll concede.
Yeah. Well, it's nice so long as the weather lasts. If it's chucking it down, it's not so much fun. Sorry, go on, Charles.
The big thing about this story, the Mechanoids.
Yeah.
What do we make of them? I mean, considering I was reminded when I popped the DVD in the machine, and the entire DVD menu is filled with the Dalek Mechanoid final battle. Everything about this story is always marketed on, it's the Mechanoids. The Mechanoids were, obviously a lot of publicity machine stuff. So what do we make of them? No, I think they're quite effective. Yeah, visually they're very effective.
Yes.
You do quite wonder what was going on with. And presumably this is Terry Nation trying to write something that sounds like it could be a computer, I guess.
For me, I think they are effective visually, but I think they're also quite intriguing. I mean, we don't really get to learn very much about them. So I guess you've got them both rescuing the Doctor and his companions, and then also keeping them prisoner. I feel like it would have been nice if they'd had maybe a couple of episodes with the Mechanoids in and we'd got to know a bit more about them. But then if there were a couple of episodes, perhaps we'd have learnt too much about them and they wouldn't be as But perhaps it's because it's the brevity that makes them kind of tantalizing.
I mean, they'd have to expand out of their, we are just servants, we are just the guards, we are the keepers of this beautiful city until the humans arrive. That's kind of all they are. And it's not clear what else they could be. And so I agree, it would be nice to see that they could be something else, but they're not given any chance in the 15 minutes or so that we get to see them.
It's odd because considering all of this, I know I did sound out Gav briefly about this earlier and said, well, why didn't they come back? And because the whole thing seems to be geared towards the idea that they want these things to be the new rivals to the Daleks. They spent a lot of the budget on building the three mechanoids. They're given their debut, but they get half an episode to do their thing, but most of that half an episode is more devoted to introducing Stephen. And it has to be said, then Peter Purvis is definitely a breath of fresh air when he turns up in this episode. He's buy into that immediately. But and they don't get any meaningful dialogue or anything. And given that the BBC at the time you had Hugh Weldon or whoever it was wanted wall to wall wanted as much Dalek content as possible. The BBC were making a lot of money out of licensing Dalek merchandise, and obviously they successfully pre-sold some Dalek toys or mechanoid licenses as well. And there was all this publicity machine, and yet, the Daleks got at least 6 episodes to strut their stuff, and you're trying to introduce it seems like they were trying to introduce a potential rival, and yet I can't quite work out why they muffed it so far. And I was asking Gav, so do you know why they didn't come back? And he said, no, it's a bit of a mystery. Speculated that Terry Nation just got carried away with this, because you'd think maybe they could have come back in Master Plan, but he said, well, maybe Terry Nation got carried away with doing James Bond in space instead, and they didn't really fit into it.
But the other problem is they're too big, aren't they? So they can't. It's going to cost them too much to store them. So I think they just chuck them out when the story's done.
Yeah, I think
did they really? Okay.
I think their size and shape, they're really impressive. We've already touched on that. There are a couple of things around this for me. One is that I think we're used to now in Doctor Who of the concept of reoccurring adversaries, and it's the Second Doctor era that really takes advantage of that returning villain type approach. But with the exception of the Daleks, who were exceptional in terms of their reception in the public eye, that really isn't part of Doctor Who. The strength of Doctor Who in those first 2 years is the very fact that it moves on to something new every story. So I don't think that there's necessarily a huge pull to create something else that can come back again and again and again. They've got the Daleks for that, and indeed, as an audience, you don't have to wait that long for the Dalek Master Plan to kick in, and that's 13 weeks effectively of Daleks in a very short while. And I think the other thing, the final thing in terms of my thoughts on this, are Doctor Who tries to recreate that Dalek magic on a number of occasions. We're going to see the Wotan machines very soon, the Quarks in the Dominators, and it shows you just how intangibly magical the Daleks are in terms of design, demeanour, sound, movement, that really the show couldn't get close to it. And I think the mechanoids are great for the purposes of this story and being something which is equal in combat with the Daleks and allows the Doctor and the team to escape and thus end the chase. But I'm not sure necessarily they have done enough to warrant a return visit. They are what they are for the purpose of this story, in my view.
Did the mechanoids gain any traction in the comics? I don't know. I'm not familiar with the comics at all.
I think they're much they feature much more. So I think the writer of the comics were convinced that the mechanoids were going to be a big thing. So I think they did feature a chunk there, but or at least more than they did in the TV series.
It was TV21, wasn't it? The Daleks' own comic strip where the mechanoids feature, and that's a Terry Nation vehicle, that TV21 strip, and the mechanoids is another of his creations. So naturally, I think they fit well in that scheme of things. They're in a comic strip, visually easily representable. They're very different to the Daleks. We know that they're effective, like for like threat to the Daleks. They're a joy to read in that TV21 strip. But again, I think fine, let them live on in comics. But I don't quite see enough of them in the chase to think, I want them back next week on the TV show.
No, I agree with you that as presented, there's not enough of them. But I just always had the impression that's what they were reaching for, and that there were enough external, non-creative drivers on the idea that they wanted to create something like this, that they can't quite work out why they sort of muffed it and didn't make more of them. If only because they were spending £812 no less on building 3 other things and giving them their own press launch and everything. And
yeah, it's a fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For something that they throw away in half an episode, and I know the final battle and everything is, it looks great the way it's edited and all of that. So it feels like they're going for something epic, but
sure. I guess we should try to sum up, otherwise we'll end up talking all night about this. I mean, my experience with the chase has been lengthy, I guess, since the mid-90s, and I've been sort of down on it on occasions and neutral on others. I'd say on this occasion I quite enjoyed it. I mean, I don't think it's a story that you want to get too into all of the intricacies of it. I mean, I think it is what it's intended to be. It's a series of set pieces against the background of a chase, and most of them are reasonably entertaining. There's always something new happening to keep the action going. Yeah, I mean, I watched it in 3 2-episode chunks, and I found that quite decent. I'm not quite sure if I'd tried to sit down and watch all 6 in one go, how I'd have felt about that. But in that kind of configuration, 2 episodes a day for 3 days, I thought it was fun.
Yeah, it's sketch show Doctor Who. It's a simple plot. It's played out well. And for me, it's lying on the sofa, Sunday afternoon, watch it through, fine. It is a Doctor Who you can absolutely take on face value.
Yeah, it's really got something for everyone, whether that is, your love of Daleks or your love of this kind of chase melodrama structure, or if you're that sort of person, you can laugh at the wobbly sets and the production errors, some of which are glaring. You might enjoy the humor. You might enjoy not enjoying the humor. As I say, there's a lot to it. And is it the worst Dalek story? No, I think it once was called that in a poll. If I remember, I think I remember reading about that. I don't particularly think that's true. And as you say, Rick, it's perfect for just a relaxing couple of hours if you're up for that. I typically am. I did watch it in one go. I'm so used to that. I'm so used to that. I've been a nerd to that since I was a kid. It's just always how I do it. It's fun. It's got Daleks and it's got Dudley Simpson, so that's always something I will watch.
Giles, any final thoughts?
Really, I think I'd probably be in more of a hurry to rewatch the sort of from halfway into episode 4 onwards. Like I feel like there's probably more to mine from that, and I'm not going to be in a particular hurry to rewatch the front half again all that often. But I am quite intrigued to do is track down the recording of the episode 6 that was cover disc thing from TV Century 21,
Oh, yes.
which I gather elaborates a bit on the story of the mechanoids, which might be quite interesting following that discussion.
Yeah, that audio must be out there somewhere. I don't know. Like to find an actual record probably would be. Pretty
I don't think I can
impressive,
afford to. I don't think I can afford to do that. I don't have a record player these days, sadly either. So.
but I'm sure I've heard a bit of it. David Graham narrating his heart out. It sounds so dramatic when he does it. So yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah. The only other thing that I learnt for the first time watching it this time is that the Grey Lady is played by Rosalind de Winter of Insect Movement fame.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay.
So I didn't realise that I'd seen her. I'd seen her face, because she plays as a Menoptera, does she? In the
She's the head. She's the one with Ian.
Yeah.
Bad fan.
Yeah,
anyway,
one of them. Anyway, yes. So we do actually get to see her face here.
There's quite a bit of Web Planet recasting here, isn't there? I think.
Yes, I was going to say because
a couple of the others. Yeah.
The Empire State Building Guide is one of the Menoptera.
Right.
I think at least one of the Iridians is too, or an Optera, or someone similar.
That could be. Jack Pitt was probably a Zarbi, or what have you.
Jack Pitt, a man of many roles. Yes.
Probably holding a record. 4 different roles in 6 episodes.
Stories.
Yeah, well done. 4 fees, I hope.
Richard, there are 3 little things I just want to get out of my system on the conclusion of the chase.
Go on then.
The first is Ian and Barbara's statement that they never thought about being able to go home until the close of the chase. And they were actually in Earth 1966, halfway through this episode of the Empire State Building. And I realised they probably felt some loyalty to the Doctor to stay through the danger of and threat of the Daleks, but that was an obvious way. If they were so fixed on getting home, that was a really good opportunity.
Good point.
The whole photographic sequence of them leaping around the banks of London and Trafalgar Square was an odd break from the normal methods of storytelling, and that might be a common theme we want to draw into the Devil's Chord. The final thing was that wonderful scene. I love the scene on the bus at the end. Ian and Barbara reflecting on they've made it home, and the discussion with the conductor about the increase the bus fare, I feel sits alongside Rose's observation at the end of the world, where she smells chips, and it's that one odd thing that really grounds you to you're back on Earth, and that's Ian and Barbara's moment. Just as I say, I just love that scene.
And of course, that is Douglas Camfield's.
Yeah,
it is,
because they borrowed some of the location filming time from Allocated to Time Meddler, didn't they?
Yes.
Although I'm intrigued, I'm not quite sure whose conceit between borrowing his time or his allocation meant that he went on set and directed the filming, but whether he then came up with the photo montage idea as well, I don't know. I'd be intrigued to know.
It feels more creative, doesn't it? So, but who knows? I mean, I shouldn't denigrate Richard Martin, because there are some things in his stories that sort of seem interesting.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, are these his 2? Did he do any others? I forget now. Is he just these 2 stories, or what else did? Well, he did the Daleks. That's right. Right. He did some Daleks.
Half of the Daleks.
Right.
And half of Edge of Destruction. We did the Edge of Destruction, but not the brink of whatever it is. Disaster.
But I wanted to say about Richard Martin is that I think one of the reasons he might get the rap that he does is he was thrown these impossible stories. Yeah. He was given 2 stories that absolutely stretched what the BBC could do. And the fact that there was only a little bit of embarrassment, you might say, coming from either of those stories. I'm not going to denigrate him for that. Because, like you say, what was the Douglas Camfield version of the chase going to be like? I don't know. Maybe better. What was the Douglas Camfield version of the Web Planet going to be like? Still probably a bit hairy.
Yeah.
So, let's have some perspective about that. Not that, of course there are probably better directors, but he had a very tough job. And so, well done.
Yes, he did the first episode of it, Edge of Destruction, plus half of the Daleks. And then Dalek Invasion of Earth, Web Planet Chase. And Out, I think, after that.
Dalek Invasion of Earth, of course, yeah. Okay. So then, he did more than I remember, and so maybe he does deserve to be... he does deserve a little bit more than I gave him, but...
I agree with what you said. I mean, he gives it a go, and what more can you really ask of somebody than that they give it a go, He didn't run screaming from the set as some Doctor Who directors have been known to do.
Yes, quite. Yeah.
Indeed.
So that's something for sure. Okay, look, let's call that to a halt there.
Very good.
And that'll be the end of our first episode of the podcast, and then we'll be back with The Devil's Chord in a mo. I made the tactical error of organising a dental appointment today to have 2 fillings done, and at around about 6 this evening I still had a very numb top lip and thought I was going to struggle to speak, but thankfully it's thawed out in the last little while. So
What time did you book it for?
Well, it was something like 4:45, I think, was the appointment. Not 2:30.
Not 2:30. Oh, dear. What a disappointment.
Yeah. Where this time we're looking at 2 stories involve... Oh, no, hang on. I haven't written that out very well. Okay.
Of course I've lost my thread. Somebody take over.